workplace, design workplace experiences. The real brains, though, is Dr. Nicholas Duck, founder of Opposite, expert in human factors and organisational psychology, who has many, many years and projects under his belt in the transport and construction industries. So we have a range of people here today. I'll just check, can everybody hear me? Maybe just put a yes in the chat just to make sure sound is all okay.
Yeah, you're good, Ash.
Great, thanks, Chris. So we have a range of people here. It seems most are from transport and logistics. Today's webinar applies to any industry really that deals with the challenge of fatigue. Please feel free to enter your name and where you're from in the chat so we can see who we have here this morning. And also, I just kindly ask you to put yourselves on mute so we don't have the background noise. Special shout out to our NHBR and SCT attendees here today, because without them, this project would not have happened. So yeah, a very big thanks to their involvement. For me, this project is like being reunited with an old friend, because I was project managing this at Opposite, and then went on maternity leave. So I've come back right at the tail end. So it's kind of a wonderful reunion, but any gaps in my knowledge will be filled by Nick today. Jacqueline can't hear me, but others can.
That's
Thanks,
all right.
Nick.
Keep going. I'll chat to Jacqueline in the meantime.
Thank you, Ta. Today we're going to start the webinar. We're going to do something a little bit different, okay? And we're going to embrace the dark side of our personalities and flip fatigue on its head. So in true Opposite style, we're going to, instead of thinking, how can we make the workplace better for a driver, we're going to ask ourselves, how can we make it difficult and make someone incredibly fatigued? So meet Alana. She is the unfortunate character that's going to be impacted by our evil decisions today. And Alana is a within-state driver for LKJ Logistics, and her role involves delivering packages from the local warehouse to customers, including various supermarkets and hardware stores. A typical shift for her is 8 hours with 2 20-minute breaks. How can we best ruin her day so that she becomes absolutely exhausted? Now, before you put your answer in, so there's 4 options here. How can we best exhaust Alana? The first option is to increase her shift hours and reduce her sleep time. Or we can create long and uncertain wait times at customer locations. We can provide her with no exercise and a poor diet, or we can have her delivered to the same location every day. Now, before you put in the chat which option you think would exhaust her the most, let me explain. You'll have 4 chances to ruin Alana's day throughout the webinar this morning. Each opportunity you can drain her energy levels by up to 25%, which means if you do a good job of fatiguing Alana, by the end you would have drained 100% of her energy, so she can't function. This sounds mean and horrible, I know. This is a way of looking at a situation in the complete opposite lens. So now is your chance to vote in the chat, and let's see which option you guys think would drain her the most.
I'll do that.
Excellent. I can see a unanimous option 2, option 1 in there. Okay, I think we've got a majority there, appears to be option 2. So let's take a look. The first option 1 and 3 impact her 15% drain in energy, 20% drain in energy, and then correct 25% drain in energy for option 2. And as you'll see, you know, this project, that wait times was considered the #1 cause of fatigue for drivers, and we hence designed a tool to help support the improvement in that space. So what we're going to do today is provide a bit of context, share the findings of the project, talk about its application, and then there'll be question time at the end. We do have a nice size group here today, so I'm comfortable if people ask questions as we go along. I think that's okay. And then any that require further discussion, we can park at the end. Also, Nick, can we provide these slides perhaps? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So if anyone is after the slides, just save you the note taking today. So the context here, I think for those of you that are here, it's probably no surprise, fatigue is a major problem in the transport industry and has been for a long time now. We can see here the stats that relate to road incidents, how much freight we're moving a year, which is ever increasing, and the cost of fatigue-related road incidents from TAC, Australian Automotive Association, and Australian Logistics Council. So it's no surprise, fatigue itself has been a problem. And so most kind of, I guess, focus intervention in this space has been around sleep. It's been around sleep deprivation, hours spent asleep, fitness for work. And so some solutions or interventions have been things like, you know, looking at work schedules, rest times, pre-start checks, and those sorts of things. All very important, but the problem has still, you know, still remains a problem. So we decided, well, what if we looked at things a bit differently and looked at the opposite? So what's the opposite of fatigue? Being awake or remaining awake. So we use the term kind of wakefulness and alertness interchangeably. Wakefulness is really about remaining awake, and alertness is about the state of active attention. So instead of thinking, well, how can we minimize fatigue or interventions that reduce fatigue, we thought, well, how can we actually support wakefulness and interventions that facilitate wakefulness? So you'll see where this then leads as we go through the findings. We first had a good look at, did some research on systemic factors of wakefulness, and we put this into a systems map, which I'll talk you through now. So we've got wakefulness. There's really 3 components to that: a physical, emotional, and cognitive aspect. When we look at the things that impact physical health, that's things like physical activity and nutrition, obviously, quality of rest, so level of deep sleep, insufficient recovery, or an amount of REM sleep. Vehicle characteristics like the temperature, air quality, ergonomics, and vibration. You might notice yourself if you've ever been driving and you've had to wind down the window to keep yourself awake. There's a certain level of discomfort that actually enables wakefulness when driving. And this can be impacted through vehicle design and vehicle settings. There are a number of factors impacting quality of rest here, such as sleep routines, impacted by work schedule, shift hours, rest stops. But also, if we think holistically about a driver, there can be personal circumstances and also financial motives that impact sleep routines and decisions around work and rest. There are also 3 factors impacting the physical activity and nutrition. and they include healthy habits influenced by our attitudes and beliefs, and also our knowledge around good health, also our facilities and opportunity to make healthy choices, which of course can be impacted by drivers' schedules, shift hours, and rest stops. So if I'm a driver and I have many fast food options available to me, it might be harder for me to make healthy choices. I know for me, I go through McDonald's thinking, I'll get a salad wrap. I'll get a salad wrap. What would you like, ma'am? I'll have a double cheeseburger, thanks. So having those, healthy options more prevalent and easier to make the choice. So that's physical health. Now, if we look at cognitive health, there are three main factors contributing to our cognitive levels of wakefulness. These include our degree of autonomy or control. So if we have choices and options in how we work, then we are more likely to remain wakeful. This is also one of the three primary psychological needs by self-determination theory. And the logic here is if we restrict people's ability to make decisions, they're more likely to become frustrated, tune out from their work, and become fatigued. A similar philosophy applies here to task characteristics. So if we're doing the same repetitive things, we're more likely to become bored and fatigued. But if we do a variety of different tasks, there's a sense of novelty in our job, and we're more likely to remain wakeful and alert. Road conditions also impact our level of alertness, because if we're driving in wet conditions with lots of potholes, roundabouts, this will mean a high level of focus from the driver. So it's not necessarily that an easier road condition is better in this instance. It can impact these three characteristics through road design and alternative routes, task variety and connectedness, and also consultation with drivers, giving them a sense of autonomy. The third and final factor here around emotional health is probably the one that is most overlooked. The things impacting our emotional state as it relates to wakefulness are things like workload, time pressure, role ambiguity, and uncertainty in the job. These are all what we call job demands, which you might know, I looked at it in great depth in the JDR model, which explains that if our demands exceed our resources, then this will likely result in a stress response. And we know that, prolonged stress results in emotional fatigue. Quality of work relationships also impact our emotional state. For example, if we have, obviously good peer support, good communication, and we feel a sense of belonging in our job, then we're going to feel more engaged and more attentive, more wakeful. But if we have poor working relationships, it drains our energy and we're going to feel more fatigued. So these two factors are influenced in the workplace through supervisory support and workplace culture. And if I could add to that, supervisory support helps the driver identify and enable access to resources to counterbalance the job demands. These two factors also influence connectedness and consultation, and they also impact degree of autonomy and sleep routines, as well as and feed into personal life conditions as well. So this provides what we believe to be a holistic understanding of the system of work for drivers. We asked supervisors at the start of this project which ones they rated as highest level of risk, so in terms of likelihood and consequence, and we found that job demands, autonomy, and task characteristics were rated highest, followed by road conditions. We'll go more into the findings soon. So we've been very fortunate to work with our incredible partners. NHBR Australia's regulator for heavy vehicles, provided the funding and the program oversight and also the subject matter expertise on this topic. Opposite, so that's us, so that's myself and Nick Duck. We managed the project, conducted the research, helped design solutions and supported the delivery. And our partners, SCT, who provided us with the access to their drivers, they also helped co-design the intervention, obviously applied the tool in their workplace. And it does take great leadership to put up your hand and say, yeah, we'll invest the time and resources on a continuous improvement initiative like this one. So Project Wide Awake sought to explore those systemic factors that impact wakefulness. Also, we looked at physical wellbeing, driver engagement, to understand what strategies were going to be effective in supporting truck driver alertness. There were different phases of the project, as you can see. The first started with engaging with drivers, collecting data, applying wearable technology, which we'll talk about soon, but that's basically the use of a Fitbit. And then we developed, co-designed an intervention, implemented it, and then evaluated the effectiveness of it. So we'll step you through that today. The participants, we had 106 participants for the online survey. 70% of them were drivers from the industry, and then 30% from drivers from SCT. The wearable technology, we had 19 Fitbit users from SCT, and the usability testing was with 3 managers because the tool was designed for manager use. So let's take a look at the engagement of drivers. This was absolutely critical to the project. As you would probably know, with any project, engaging your key stakeholder group, absolutely imperative. What SCT really helped us do was consider, well, what's the best way to engage with drivers? It's not easy with their work hours, usually loading and unloading, and then they're on the road. So there isn't much of an opportunity to connect with them and explain what the project's about and onboard them with the project. So we arrived at the decision to host a breakfast campaign, which SCT kindly suggested and provided some lovely chefs on site to cook up some bacon and egg rolls. And when the drivers started their shift, they could, you know, come and have their breakfast and we could have a chat with them. We invited them to complete the survey. Some I found preferred to actually talk through the results with me rather than complete it like online, go away and do it. So that was fine. We kind of completed it on the spot for them. They could opt in to wear a Fitbit as well. So that was a nice bonus that they received for being involved with the project. So we did really, I guess, a bit of a road trip and went to a number of different sites in Victoria and I think South Australia. So then we collected the data through the survey, also invited the broader industry. And we had 2, I guess, main surveys. One is the brief version, which had 9 items. So that was for when we had an opportunity to, you know, connect with drivers, but they didn't have much time. We would do the brief survey. And for those that had more time, but were also interested, they did the full length survey. So you can see here the factors that we measured. The numbers in the brackets is the number of items. So we looked at, using one item, looked at each of those factors in light grey. We asked them the causes of fatigue. So we had open-ended questions there and asked them what they would simplify to reduce fatigue. And then we had an extended simplification survey. We looked at psychological capital and well-being, and asked 2 questions about engagement, which was around absorption in work. So you can see here, the number of drivers that did the short survey versus the full survey. Over half were within state drivers. So that's an important distinction, is that there were some slight differences between within state and interstate drivers, but those differences weren't significant when it came to wakefulness. So that was quite interesting. The full results, by the way, are in the report. So if you were interested in what those differences were, you could look at that. There was a representation, as you can see, across Australia. So let's revisit Alana, because Alana is now facing some frustrations in her work environment, and it's impeding her ability to do her best work. So she's faced with lengthy wait times, thanks to our choice earlier. Also, she's got a lot of complex procedures, lack of instruction and uncertainty in the job. She's feeling quite fatigued now. How can we best ruin her day even more so she can't keep her eyes open for Alana? We have 4 options here. We can restrict her ability to make decisions. We can disrupt her work relationships, have her do tasks she doesn't enjoy, or we could be negative and critical of her work. So feel free to add into the chat stream now which option is really going to ruin Alana. We're going to feel pretty sorry for Alana by the end, I think. Okay, we can see a unanimous 1 coming through. Yep, I think 1 looks like the verdict here. All right, let's take a look.
Recording in progress.
The options that so I can hear an echo. That's better. The options that reduced her fatigue the least out of those was number 2 and 4. Closely in comes number 1. So you did reduce her fatigue by 20%. Well done. You could have reduced her fatigue even further with option 3. And this will become apparent why we put option 3 as we share the findings from the project. So that's option 3 as it relates to this project and our findings.
I think you meant increase their fatigue, Ash. Not.
Oh, sorry. Thanks. So that would increase her fatigue the most. So let's take a look at the project findings now. We found that 32% of drivers had poor sleep quality in the month prior to completing the survey. Wait times was the number one reason for fatigue, as we mentioned earlier. 1 in 5 drivers experienced high level of workplace complexity. 26% of drivers experienced low levels of well-being or engagement in their work. These results are from both SCT and the broader industry. And the t-test revealed no significant differences between SCT and the broader sample. So let's take a closer look, because what we then did is we ran some correlations and regressions to further understand the interrelationship between these variables. We found that all of these 5 factors correlated significantly with alertness, and you can see the R and P values below. So work environment if there was a work environment that enabled people to do their best work, they were more alert. If the workplace was more simplified, they were more alert. If their physical health with health and sleep both correlated with alertness, and also the more engaged that drivers were, the more alert they were. So when we looked at the regression analysis, we found that these three factors accounted for almost half of the variance in alertness, so 43% of the variance. And then we looked at, we found a moderation relationship between the work environment, engagement, and alertness. So we found that engagement reduced the negative impact of a poor work environment on alertness. So what that means is if you have a work environment that doesn't enable people to do their best work, and you further disengage them with their work by having them do tasks that they don't enjoy, so they can't engage with the work, then they are going to feel more fatigued. So this was a significant relationship that we found, which was quite interesting. And then we looked at data as it related to wearable technology. So we invited participants to wear the Fitbits and then evaluated that data. One of the key statistics in Fitbit, if anyone's had a Fitbit, or I use an Oura Ring, which measures similar things, you know, it looks at your sleep data is one of the main things, as well as, you know, steps and heart rate and so on. So let's go back to Alana now, because let's say we have an opportunity now to further her fatigue by impacting her sleep directly. So Alana is now working in a poor work environment and her engagement levels are low. So how would we disrupt her sleep to best ruin her day and make it even more difficult for her to function? Would we have her go to sleep at different times every night? Would we have her sleep on an uncomfortable mattress? We could have her sleep during daytime hours, or have her wake up hours earlier than usual. So enter into the chat now which option you think would affect her most. Yeah, quite a range. So we've got 1, 1 and 3 mostly by the looks. Yep. Okay, so we've got 1 and 3. I don't know, probably more 1s than 3s. I know, exactly equal. Anyone else want to come in with a 1 or 3? Sway it over to the other side. 1. Thanks. Okay, so so a unanimous 1 majority vote. Let's take a look. So 1 and 4 would impact her sleep, say, impact her fatigue even more by, say, 15%. Sleep during daytime hours would impact her by, say, 20%. But sleeping on an uncomfortable mattress, the most at 25%. And you'll see why we put that as being the highest. And remember, this relates to the particular findings from this project. So let me take you through the Fitbit findings now, and you'll see why that is the one rated highest there. So we had 19 SCT participants across 3 states. I will point out that data was is very variable, because it depends on the participant charging the Fitbit, wearing the Fitbit every day, and then having data, and then having the data comparable across a certain point in time, so that you've got that snapshot of time for all participants. So it says 19 participants, but that doesn't mean all 19 was used for that particular data set, if that makes sense. So what we found was that perceived alertness, so from the survey, did not relate to duration of sleep. So whether you had 5 hours or 8 hours of sleep didn't seem to have a significant impact on whether you thought you were more aware or wakeful. So that was interesting, because we would have thought a direct and strong relationship there. Drivers who took more steps were more alert, so that was another interesting one. Obviously, drivers have limited opportunity to do more steps, but that steps accounted for 36% of the variance and was very close to statistically significant. And then the third finding was about the number of awakenings related significantly to levels of alertness. So if you have an uncomfortable mattress and you wake up every hour of the night and it disrupts your sleep consistently throughout the night, that is more likely to impact your wakefulness or ability to be alert on the job while you're driving. So that was interesting as well. So we're going to now take a look at what we then did. So obviously we collected all this data, looked at the findings, and then we developed an intervention to apply within the workplace and evaluated that. So I'm now going to hand over to Nicholas Duck, who's going to take us through the intervention phase.
Thanks, Ash. We just move on to the next slide. Yeah, great. And then the next one. So basically, what we did was really some early work around how could we address how could we address wait times in a practical way. So as Ash said earlier, so many interventions for fatigue in the past have kind of focused a lot on encouraging drivers to get more rest or to be on more appropriate schedules, which are all very defensible ideas. But quite often, what is not looked at a lot are those kind of stickier and trickier things to fix within the organisation and the workplace itself. So operational things that like efficiencies and better systems and processes and better leadership actions that actually indirectly influence fatigue. So in this case, we worked on a prototype to look at excessive wait times. And in this case, we looked at, first of all, finding out what drivers actually wanted through interviews. So this is one of the bugbears of drivers is wait times at like depots, places where they drop off their supply. And it's not just wait times, it's also, as we mentioned earlier, it's also uncertainty. It's the sitting there not really knowing how long you're going to be waiting. That's almost worse in a way. And then, of course, perceived wait times as well. You might have an idea that you've been waiting for a long time just because things are a bit monotonous. We conducted some interviews with supervisors, so people actually responsible for kind of overseeing those operations, and then also conducted some leadership workshops to design a product and different approaches to dealing with wait times. So in short, this is kind of the overall summary model. So if you can see in the middle there that we're concerned about excessive wait times, which lead to lots of issues. So they don't just lead to operational delays, which are a problem for business costs, but they also contribute ultimately indirectly to psychosocial risk and driver fatigue directly. So psychosocial risk being things that feeling like you don't have a lot of control over your day, for example, because you're waiting for other things to happen. That can be a frustration. Anyone who is not a heavy vehicle driver and knows what it's like to be stuck in traffic, knows exactly how that feels. And then what we were interested in as well was understanding what are those contributing factors that lead to it. So some of the really complex issues that that the industry is dealing with is that consumer demand and stock management is a very dynamic thing. So it's very difficult to really pin down exactly how long you're going to be waiting. There can be lack of good data as well. One of the discoveries in this project was that although a lot of really good data was being collected, it was still very hard to unpack what it meant. So we worked with SCT really closely to try and unravel that. And that, of course, can lead to poor forward planning, because if you don't have the data, it's hard to plan. And then queue management as well can also be impacted by that as well. So what we suggested here, and to do this sort of targeted experiment really, was we thought what the current approach is that the driver's notified of the delivery, the time and location, the driver arrives, they wait at a location. If there's an issue, like something's taking a really long time, they might report back and say there's a problem or that there's a frustration there. And then if they've got time and it becomes a persistent issue, then one of the avenues to explore is actually just to call up the customer and try and figure out a solution, which can be quite difficult because it's a bit of a he said, she said scenario, and you're basing it off anecdotal stories, which isn't always that compelling, especially when everyone's really busy and obviously the customers are really going to be focused on throughput and maybe not as concerned about how long their contractors are waiting, because it may not have a huge impact on their bottom line. No, maybe just go back a sec there, Ash, sorry. Yeah, so the alternative approach that we were putting forward was that we thought what would be useful would be to increase the visibility of wait time. So actually quantify it so it's a lot cleaner and easier to do. So that's really lifting it up to a level where you can strategically look at it and say, right, okay, so we've got a real problem with this particular location. It could also be there's one particular driver who seems to be copying a lot of the wait times as well. Like you might just be a coincidence, might be the location they often deliver at, but it allows you to, that'd be having the data on that is still useful. And then based on the data, what would be useful is to actually develop some more systemic strategies in the long term. And so one of those options could be, for example, to present the data to customers, to actually say, look, this is what's happening. Can we dial this down a bit? Is there something else we can look at? But it's arming leaders with data, essentially, so they can make those decisions. So basically, we had initially we had a 90-minute leadership workshop. So part of the process was as our co-design process. So we weren't just getting input from the actual drivers, but also we were looking at what would be useful for the fleet supervisors. And basically the awareness and alignment part of it was just really that vision I mentioned just then. It's like, how could it look? What could it look like if we change things? Determining a process that might operationalize it, and then working through a process for actually building the system. Now, bearing in mind that this is a working prototype, so it actually all works, but it is a prototype. But one of the benefits of this program is we've made this available so that others can actually use it as well. So we're aiming for early next week just to upload this onto our website so that you can customize it if you have a need for something like this. In theory, you could probably use it for more than heavy vehicles, but it could also be used as a way of providing to contractors or to organisations who you think might need something like this. It may also just simply be a way of visualising what our solution could look like if there's a lot of data being collected, but you want to be able to summarize it in a clean way. So basically, this is the dashboard that we developed from existing data. So we didn't try and create a brand new data collection system. We went in thinking, how could we just make the data that you currently got more usable? And if you see there on the left, basically, we've got a summary of the different locations and that we looked at. And then you get essentially a summary of the longest wait time, the shortest wait time, and the average wait time. So we cut the data a few times to try and work out what's the best way of presenting it. And we thought, well, the longest wait time does definitely tell us where we've got some real outliers, but it's also important to identify what the average might be as well, because it might be that there might be an outlier that's really driving up that longest wait time, but it provides enough for you to go, right, we need to delve into this a bit longer. So that's at a state level. And then on the right, we developed this toolkit so that you could then essentially go through different locations that are uploaded in the data and systematically go through and identify which sites have got the longest wait times. So reasonably fairly intuitive from that point of view. You can also, depending on the data set you've got in the back end, you can also look at different time periods. So you might be like, I'm interested in this month, or it might be I'm interested in this year. So you can probably see that with a tool like this, you could essentially look at this day to day. You could look at it every 2 weeks. You could look at it every 6 months, depending on what your strategy is. So you might want to look holistically over the year. Where are we wasting the most amount of time? And then that provides a more strategic action to address that problem. Okay, so that was the design process. And these basically, there was a few strategies that we provided to the fleet managers. So what we thought was this: if we're designing an actual prototype system, one of the things that's often overlooked is that, and we rush to looking at systems and processes without thinking about what you can actually do with the system. So you've all probably have experience working in places where there's plenty of IT systems, but they're either not being used, or it isn't quite clear why they were built in the first place, what they actually produce. And many systems sit there idle with, coincidentally, idle with idle times. They sit there fairly idle, not being used to their full potential. So what we came up with was a kind of a 4-tier approach for how you might deal with data. So part of the actual engagement with fleet managers was to explore these strategies. One of them is, number one, is if there are a lot of issues with particular drivers saying that they're waiting a long time and they're unhappy, one of the things that could be explored is it factual? So it's possible it is factual, that they're dealing with it, and then you can adopt another strategy. But there are situations where some people will think, I'm spending ages somewhere, but it could be a perception, but compared to other locations or other drivers. So that's one that allows some, concrete data to say, well, technically you waited 20 minutes here, it wasn't an hour. So it helps to kind of remove that ambiguity around how long things take to wait. Like when you're waiting in traffic and you get home and you say, God, it took me an hour to get home tonight, and really it took you 33 minutes, but it felt like an hour. The other one is the strategy is that it allows you to go, we've got a lot of wait times here. It doesn't tell us why, and it's enough evidence to say we can now prioritize where we would like to focus our attention. So what might be causing some of the wait time issues? So that might actually be a client-related issue. It could be that there's a seasonal effect as well, which is another strategy. It could be that it's just bad luck for that particular week. It might just be everything's really busy because of there's last minute demand. And Christmas is a good example. And then the last two are similar, but the long-term trends could be more broad around. It could be actually about a customer type that we're noticing wait times are increasing excessively at a certain location. And then the seasonal trends is more about, we know if we look at the data and we track wait times more generally, then we know that there's a pattern forming every year, and that allows us to prepare for that pattern. And again, some of that stuff is anecdotally known already. We know that that Christmas season is going to be particularly busy. But what would be useful would be to quantify it and say, well, look at all these other peaks and troughs we get throughout the year. So essentially, those were the 4 strategies that were provided to the fleet managers to say, look, if you've got a tool and you've got data, that's one thing, but there are some defensible strategies you can take using this data as well. So the intervention is more than the system; it's also the strategies themselves. All right. So the next question is, how can we? I think this might even be the last one. How are we going to ruin Alana's day even more? So now that we've seen like a rough idea of what the weight loss tool looks like, which one of these would you put in place to make sure it was as ineffective as possible? So in other words, how can we make the tool as ineffective as possible so that it essentially doesn't work? Would it be making the tool difficult for a supervisor to use, so usability? Would it be making it so her supervisor doesn't share any of the data with customers, so they've got data but they don't, Michael's jumped in already, he knows. Penalising, I'm not saying he's right, but I'm saying he put in a response. Penalising her for excessive wait times, so causing, actually punishing her for something that might be outside of her control. That looks like a pretty irresistible one, doesn't it? And number 4, addressing ongoing wait time issues at certain locations. Or should we say failing to address? Actually, I think probably more to the point. Got a bit of a mixed response there. If I look here, I can see, gosh, I think we've got a pretty mixed response. Maybe, no, 3-2. What do you reckon, Ash? It's very mixed, basically.
Yeah, I think option 3 only by 1 vote.
By a whisker.
Yeah.
Okay, so shall we share what we found based on our results anyway? Yeah, so it's a bit of a trick question, sorry, everyone. All of them are equally as bad. To be perfectly honest, the penalising her for excessive wait times probably could be argued to be the nastiest one to do of all of them. It probably has an impact, a much far-reaching impact. That said, it's possible as well that no, that one probably is the worst one. Let's move on to the next one there, Ash. So what we did is we evaluated. So bearing in mind this was like a prototype intervention. So, and I can talk through some of the challenges we had with that, because it actually, in some ways, is more informative than the actual tool itself, because it tells you how difficult it can be to implement some of these changes. So essentially what we were interested in, first of all, was understanding the usability of the tool itself, and also to make improvements to it as we went along as well. So this is out of 5, basically. We had an interesting, this is actually a positive thing and a negative thing. Generally speaking, we measured across time. So we had 4 time points. So we tested the tool and we try our best to work in the schedule with the fleet managers, which is actually really challenging because they're very busy. And then every now and again, there'd be some event, including like COVID event all of a sudden, so we were squeezing into the schedules to discuss wait times. But right from the beginning, there was, the ratings were really high across the board on the tool. So easy to use, information's easier to retrieve, but those 3 are the top you can see there. Now, the driver fatigue is really a measure of its impact on driver fatigue. So sort of flip that around the other way. So how they think that if we address this problem, what impact do we think it would have on driver fatigue? So that was a self-report measure of driver fatigue. Ideally, what would be good to do across time would be to continue wearing those devices, and it could even be a policy that organisations might have to have continuous feedback from data, so you could do long-term mapping of the use of these tools. So we might, so these were on the low, when we say lower scores, they were still relatively high. Generally speaking, information was easy to retrieve. the data would generally help address wait time issues and simplify work. So that was done across the 4 time points. Okay, so these are the essentially the qualitative results from the users. So some of the benefits that were identified were things like being able to use them for long-term trends. So looking at wait times to say, how could we actually improve things? How could we make things more efficient? Something that continually came up was just really having full transparency over just what's really happening, because it just allowed for greater confidence for people to have discussions with customers, because obviously with your customer, you want to maintain a positive relationship with them, and you don't want to be going to them and having difficult conversations over issues. But when the data is accurate, it allowed some of the feedback that was coming through were things like, when we have this conversation, it would be good if we just had lots of data to back us up. So even if they say, oh, that was because of this or that was because of that, then there's evidence to say, actually, we've got that in the data. The actual wait time data itself doesn't always tell you exactly what's going on behind the scenes, like what the actual cause was. So doing some further research with drivers, for example, could be beneficial there. It could be, it also allows you to you leverage past interventions like roster managements and things like that. Strategic decision making I mentioned earlier. So that was basically the idea of having data so that you can think more strategically about changes you want to make rather than being reactive, because it can be in these sorts of environments where there's just basically endless throughput of stock and people driving. It can be difficult to not just react to the squeaky wheels during the week or during the months. And lastly, what they identified was that a tool that's utilised like this long term would really engage stakeholders. So through empowering them, so giving them the options that they might not have had before. Bearing in mind with all of this that we've developed a prototype tool that was designed for SCT. It was based on their situation. What these sorts of findings suggest is that any tool or any approach that really elevates the discussion about wait times could have these sorts of benefits. So it doesn't just have to be a tool that we developed. It could be any good IT system, and it might even be a fundamental criteria for any journey management system or any system that tracks data. So some of the action planning that all of this that the tool was identified to improve. So this essentially could be fed into roster management. So trend analysis, as I mentioned earlier, looking at seasonal trends, you could build that into your actual roster management itself. You could say, well, perhaps we need more drivers on at this stage. Internal reviews could facilitate discussion about what's causing some of these trends or issues. In theory, with some of these things, I envisage that you could even do some really good statistical analysis that looks at trends of safety incidents, and ideally, if you've got lots of data, you can start to look at those correlations. And I think I probably laboured on this a bit, but I think the primary benefit, it seems that if we've got some good data, it does allow to have conversations with customers that isn't just on anecdotal stories or general concerns that have been raised. You can drill down and show them an actual figure and say, this is how we're measuring it at the moment. Okay, so these are essentially we had fleet manager user groups, and these are some of the data. So the wait time visibility, this is how they scored it out of 5. You can see there across the board that was quite high. The actual understanding was a bit more mixed, and I think that's in part. I think what was happening there was that it would be validating suspicions, but in some cases it may validate it, but it didn't necessarily explain exactly what was going on, because it's not always easy to work that out just from looking at wait times. What it does is that first step allows you to go, well, we know there's a problem, it's quantifiably a problem, but now we've got a reason to look at that. And then the rating of strategy development as well, reasonably high there as well, from usability testing. Now, this is essentially the logic model. So just again, as I was saying before, when we designed this program, in many ways, these programs are designed to increase awareness of the issue, and we weren't expecting to absolutely solve it, but hoping that through sharing it with audiences like yourselves and others, that there can be a greater push to really address this problem. And so the sharing of the logic model, we thought, was useful to kind of illustrate, you know, this is what we're trying to achieve. Essentially, we try to increase the visibility of wait times. If we understand the issue, then we can address them. The strategies are used to kind of focus what you can actually do, so that it's not just an ad hoc reaction to the wait time. In the short term, what the model proposes is that there can be some immediate responses to like some serious problems, but really the long-term trends is that you'd have to ensure that fleet managers and users are using this all the time, so that it's not a reactive approach, because the last thing we need is more reactive approaches in any industry where we get some data and we quickly rush out to try and fix it. What we're really trying to get across is that tools like this, if there's a good system in place where leaders are upskilled and they know how to manage the data and know how to manage the customers and so on, that what you get is over time gradual benefits that not only are better for business, but also hopefully better for the drivers' engagement and their long-term fatigue levels. Rightio. So So we're up now to the last part of the session, and then we can leave things open for questions. So we'll just tick along, Ash. Okay. So these are the challenges I think we're facing, and this is not necessarily just related to wait times, but I think are important to elevate into the discussion as well, which is that the wait time issue it has essentially, it's an industry norm. And when we brought it up with NHVR initially, that this is an area we thought we'd focus on, because keeping in mind when we started Wide Awake, we didn't go in saying we're going to address wait times. It was something we discovered in the process. So when we went back and said we're going to focus on this, they nodded knowingly that, yeah, this isn't just an SCT problem, it's an industry-wide problem. And it's almost become an expectation that this is just what happens. So a norm, it's a social norm or a business norm. The other big challenge is the complexity of any issue where you've got multiple stakeholders who are tied up in it. Because if you're running a business but you're also locked in very closely with the customer's operating schedule and their needs, it can be very hard to unravel your own operational challenges if the customer's tied in with those as well. So this is the wait time issue is ultimately in many cases going to be a collaboration that has to be between customers and the contractors, because in order to solve it. And that, of course, is going to be a challenge, because depending on who your customer is, some might be very open to sit down and to collaborate, and others might be not as interested. They might be the contract might be set up in such a way that it doesn't give you a lot of that power to do that. And that's across the industry, those sorts of challenges. The other challenge we have, and I guess one of the benefits of having a group like us come in to do this work, is that everyone talks about these problems, but there isn't a lot of time to actually have dedicated focus to discuss them and to slow down and trial new tools, to go out and actually talk to drivers and gather data. So we had a luxury SCT and had a luxury in that we had the funding from NHVR, which basically is enabling this continuous improvement activity. But if that's not there, then dedicating the time to actually focus on continuous improvement becomes a huge challenge, because time is money, and not just that, but people are extremely busy. Having from my own business for the last 10 years, I've never met a client who wasn't run off their feet. So it's very difficult to actually focus on those things. And then lastly, there is also another systemic issue with any intervention, which is not just in this industry, but across many industries. There are frontline workers and people who are working really hard and have been, especially if they've been in the industry for a very long time, start to become very cynical about any continuous improvement activity. And partly it's because if they've engaged in programs previously which didn't end up going anywhere, then they start to be skeptical about the benefit. And that's an immediate obstacle at the start of any new program, not just for consultants, but also any change agents within an organization. And it's again, that's not going to be solved by addressing the cynicism. It's probably addressing the approach with the drivers and also the demonstration of results. So the opposite of those or the recommendations that we would generally follow with something like this is that the first thing is the norms appear when you allow them to really just linger, and if you allow the norm just to basically spontaneously come along. And I had this discussion with a client the other day dealing with norms in a completely different industry, and I said to them, with norms, workplace norms, you can just leave the workplace alone and allow the norms to develop naturally, and they will. And what will happen though is that a whole heap of negative ones will creep in that you won't want. And then one day you'll wake up and say, let's address them. It'll be a lot harder. But if you get on top of them nice and early and then reinforce them through good practical interventions, good leadership practices, then you start to break up the norm over time. And so some of those things would be not taking wait times as just like a standard, oh, that's just what we have to put up with, but actively, constantly pushing and trying to change it. Obviously, you need the collaboration issue is essential, and this is one of these biggest challenges. I know clients who, for instance, have got some big clients in like mining, for example, where contracts are very difficult to. They're not really set up for good collaboration, and so this is an aspirational thing, having a really good relationship with your client, but probably suggests that even when entering into contracts with clients, seeing if you can establish that right from the beginning, that you're seeking those clients who are prepared to do that. Otherwise, you'll have an ongoing antagonistic relationship with them, which can make these changes very difficult. That's probably the biggest challenge, because everyone needs clients and customers, and you can't really dictate exactly who your customers are. So the other area is the continuous improvement, as I mentioned earlier, that it really should be something any safety critical industry needs to continuously embed continuous improvement, whether it's in safety or engagement. It should almost be part of the DNA. Like we need to continuously do this, not done in an ad hoc way. And most organizations do to a point, but probably don't invest as much time and as much budget and effort to doing it. And a lot of the problems from not doing it creep in all the time and probably cost more in the long run. And then the cynicism with drivers this is where we're discovering across so many industries now, where we've been invited to look at not just fatigue, but also psychosocial risk, which is coming up more often than anything else at the moment. And just other indirect examples where people are disengaged. So high turnover issues, issues where staff don't feel engaged in their work, anything that is it looks like it could be survey results, even like when engagement survey results, where people are looking at scores and going, I don't understand why people say that they don't have enough novelty or variety in their work, or that they don't feel like they want to work longer hours on a project they might find enjoyable. All of those things are a sign that people are disengaged. And one of the things that we often recommend is that when we go in and engage whether it be drivers or frontline workers, there's no reason why that couldn't be a standard practice for all leaders, that you did have in place a process for constantly surveying, doing ride-alongs with your own drivers, or going and working side by side with people for a couple of days every month, just to get a sense, a pulse check of what's going on, and getting to know people a bit better and building relationships. Quite often in workplaces, primarily probably because we're very busy, it's very easy to almost disengage from groups who are working on things that are, I guess, quite separate, and only dip in from time to time instead of actually approaching engagement more often. And in the early stages of this project, I'd suggested to the team that, if anything, the intervention might not even focus at wait times in the future. It could just be transforming the engagement approach into something that's operational, so that it's done all the time. We've got some more information on our website. We've actually got the full report, so it's pretty easy to find. It's just projectwideawake.com.au. On Monday, we are going to upload the tool that we had. So this is what it looks. There'll be a pack essentially that will explain how to use it, and plus the actual Excel tool itself. So what we'll do is we're going to have like a more of a template version, which removes all the branding and is just set up for any workplace or organisation. And we'll also have a little video that will walk through how to use the tool, so how to set up the data in the back end, and then how to then run it as well. So that will be uploaded on the website. If you haven't already, if you follow our LinkedIn page, we'll do an update on the Monday just to remind everyone that everything's been uploaded there. And feel free as well to contact us if you need any more guidance or advice, or if there's some technical issues. But essentially, the tool at the moment it's Excel based, so it should be available to use in any workplace. And the data setup in the background is fairly simple. So if you happen to be interested in using the tool and you've got a data set, then essentially it just needs a few data fields to be completed, which can either come from an export or, I guess in theory, could just be entered in manually. But the tool is basically designed just to suck out the most relevant details so that it presents them in the way that you see here. Rightio. So how do we go today, Ash, with the activity?
The group did exceptionally well, and they managed to ruin Alana's day by draining her energy by 80%. So almost got to the 100%. 80% is also pretty good. So yeah, she's incredibly fatigued, and I'm concerned about her safety on the road now.
Yeah, so one of the reasons we did that activity was that we thought it's kind of almost apparent when you actually look for problems. If you say, let's do these things, it might, if we actually looked for active ways to hurt someone's day, you can pretty much run off a great list of things. You could say, oh, if you did this, this, and this, that could really ruin someone's day. It's often a lot harder to flip it around the other way and say, how can we make improvements? So obviously all of the responses, all of the options today, you could almost go through them and do the opposite of all of those things. And that wasn't a tongue-in-cheek way of talking about our brand, by the way. That was just a coincidence. All right, so any questions, feel free to either talk or you could add them to the chat. Happy to cover off anything you'd like us to embellish on. Give you a couple of minutes.
No questions. It must have made sense then, so that's a good start.
Yeah, or no sense.
Or no sense, yeah.
If you do happen to have any questions after the session, feel free to contact us. As I said, on LinkedIn, you could, if you follow us on LinkedIn on our page, the Wide Awake page, so Project Wide Awake. In fact, we might put that in the chat. Ash, do you have a link to the LinkedIn page? So Ash will
Yes.
pop that in the chat. Then you could just basically follow, if you just like the page, then when we update the LinkedIn page, you should have a link to everything there. The full report, as I said, was on the website, and yeah, you can correspond with us either on LinkedIn or you can email us directly. So all of our contact details. Well, we could probably pop that in the chat as well, Ash, a couple of the contact details.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, we had one question here around the drivers' cynicism in relation to collecting their private data. That's a really good question. A lot of, because we've done a few studies now with wearable tech, and almost always before we even start the process is that internally a lot of people are concerned about data privacy for their staff. So they'll say, we don't think anybody's going to want to sign up for this because everyone's worried about their data. In practice, that doesn't seem to have happened. I can only think of one occasion where it was a problem with one client, and it was around a union dispute, so it wasn't individual, so to speak. But generally speaking, I've actually found it how surprising most people who've participated with wearable tech are not actually as super concerned about the privacy. Now, we don't just go in and say it'll be all right. We walk them through and explain that we're not using their data to individually report on a particular person using it, their health data. As we're researchers, we're looking at aggregate data, so we'll put in all the obligatory and reasonable controls in place. But generally, cynicism isn't too high with the use of these tools. One of the interesting practical issues with data, with the tools themselves, is originally we wanted to use the wearable tech, which was the Oura Ring, which I actually still wear. I think Ash still wears hers from another project. That they're pretty good, and they don't have to be charged very often, so they get around that practical constraint of battery charging, which we encountered on this project. But the problem with the drivers in this study, and it was raised possibly a safety issue where if the ring gets caught on something, then they could, it could, literally could tear off a finger or something. So it's actually a genuine safety issue. It could also be an issue for other manual jobs where you're doing a lot of lifting and the ring would get in the way. So we use that. That's why we use the Fitbit. That was probably the only big issue we had to overcome at the start. And then Peter, thank you. You've asked, did you come up with strategies to address scheduling that may affect fatigue, varying start times? We didn't develop strategies, Peter, specifically on scheduling. I think that probably would have been something we would have focused on if it came through as something they wanted to look at directly. But I think you're right around I think there's still a lot of untapped value from scheduling, because that still seems to emerge across industries as being a real problem. Ash and I recently finished studies in control rooms, for example, where it's quite clear that the scheduling of activities in control room settings really is a huge issue. And no doubt it's also in other industries like fly in, fly out industries, where the schedule is just diabolical. But in this particular study, we didn't look at that scheduling directly. Did I answer your questions all right there, Luke, Peter? Is any other questions? I'll give it another minute. If anything else comes to mind, feel free to pop something else into the chat. Or we might just probably wrap up. I think if there's no more questions, as I said, you've got the links in the folder there in the chat right now. So there is the LinkedIn page Ash put in. You can see our email addresses. They're easy enough to find online anyway. No, thank you. I'm fairly sure that's not Collins. It's the name of the organisation. So thank you, and Peter. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us today. It's kind of a quirky time for our schedule, being middle of the week, frantic 10 o'clock session. Not an easy Friday one, so I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day. And thanks, guys. Thanks very much. Thanks, Terry. And we'll feel free to contact us if you want any more information. Thanks again to the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator for not only being extremely supportive of the work, but really empowering Opposite to be autonomous in the whole process. So they're very really enabled a lot of creative thinking and trusted us all the way through. And of course, SCT Logistics, we had Chris Nowdred here today, who been a big supporter of the project and driving it internally, even though he's been run off his feet with other operational things. He also been very supportive of other work that we've done in other industries to tackle mental health and fatigue issues. So thanks to Chris as well, and to the Opposite team as well, Ash and the rest of the team who helped with this, various parties behind the scenes. But yep, all contributed successfully, and I think I've learned a lot along the way as well, which isn't too hard, because I probably need a lot of lessons learned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Nick.
See ya. Bye.
Yeah, bye.